I am the PWS Program Manager and the Inpatient Teacher at the Children's Institute of Pittsburgh's Center for Prader-Willi Syndrome. I'm excited to be here today to assist you with understanding how to effectively support students with PWS in the school system. Oops. Okay. During this presentation, I'm going to discuss how students with Prader-Willi syndrome relate to the IDEA, also known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Common characteristics to cognition for students with PWS will also be discussed. Best practices related to writing an IEP for a student with PWS, and how to provide accommodations and modifications for this population of students in the school setting will also be provided. Finally, a problem-solving activity will be completed at the end of the presentation to get you thinking about how to support students with PWS during common activities that may occur in the classroom. So let's talk about how students with PWS relate to the IDEA. All students with disabilities are entitled to a free, appropriate public education, or FAPE, that meets their needs and prepares them for post-secondary education, employment, and independent living. When FAPE is discussed in the school setting, it is very important to look at the idea of FAPE like you are buying a car. So for example, schools are mandated to provide the student with a car that gets them from point A to point B. It doesn't have to be a Lexus or a Cadillac model, it just has to run. Some schools provide a Lexus model, which would be considered over and above FAPE, and some schools provide a Honda that may not have any extra features but meets the needs of the student at the minimal level. So in other words, as long as the needs of the student are met, but maybe not in the best way, the school is still in compliance with providing FAPE to a student with PWS. Prader-Willi syndrome meets one of the 13 disability categories under IDEA and is typically identified for specially designed instruction and related services under a couple different IDEA categories. One is other health impairment, or OHI. The other is often ID, or an intellectual disability. And finally, many students with Prader-Willi syndrome often qualify for services under the category of multiple disabilities. The reason that students with PWS qualify for special education is because that they have one of the 13 disability categories under the IDEA, and they show a need for specially designed instruction in the classroom. Students qualifying for special education must show both of these aspects, a category under IDEA and the need for specially designed instruction, in order to receive special education services. The other piece that is important to remember when analyzing special education is the concept that special education is a service and not a place. So if the student with PWS is placed into a life skills classroom where there are activities that focus on following recipes and cooking, shopping for food at a grocery store, or going to order food at a restaurant independently, these activities would not be appropriate or meet the needs of the student with Prader-Willi syndrome. So many teachers say, but this is what we do in the life skills classroom. It is completely understandable that these activities may be appropriate for other students with disabilities in that setting. However, the academic services, the instructional activities, and the related services that a student with PWS needs to be successful are not these activities. Although a student may be placed in the life skills environment, alternative activities should be provided in order to meet the needs of the student with PWS in all areas. It is important to remember that maximum functioning is the goal for the student with PWS, not independence. Now let's talk about cognition and how it relates to Prader-Willi syndrome. Individuals with PWS vary widely in their cognitive abilities, and it's also important to understand each student as an individual. An IQ score for a student with in this population can typically range between a 40 and 105, with the average IQ being around a 70. Most students are diagnosed with a mild learning disability, while others have more severe learning difficulties or are identified as a student with an intellectual disability. At the other end of the cognitive development, a minority of students can also have the intellectual capacity to pass things like GRE exams, college placement tests, or state assessments at the proficient level. Some students can even have the ability to engage in typical regular education curriculum with very low academic supports in the classroom. There's a large scatter of abilities, and there is no research related to why this is the way in which students with PWS present cognitively. When tested with formal or informal assessments, many students with PWS do not perform up to their tested ability. This typically happens because there's a developmental delay at the social or the emotional level that plays a part. So for example, students with PWS may experience emotional outbursts that are verbally or physically aggressive, and they may not understand appropriate social boundaries or interactions. They have been observed to experience test anxiety and not perform up to their actual level of ability because of anxiety during testing sessions. Additionally, regardless of the cognitive level of ability, students will never have control over their craving for food. It is important to note that each student is an individual and may have a stronger drive to seek food. Students at any cognitive level may be able to understand appropriate diets in an instructional setting, but when left to independently manage this, they are not able to follow the diet or generalize the correct diet or implement the diet independently on a daily basis. So, in other words, if they were forced to pick between a donut and a bag of carrots, they may be able to demonstrate that the carrots are the healthier option, but if left to their own devices, they would eat both items if not properly supervised because it was readily available. It's always important to offer the least restrictive environment to a student with PWS in the school setting. However, based on need, a more restrictive environment may be necessary. Some students have been successful with supports in a mainstream classroom, and other students need a more self-contained setting. Typically, the self-contained classroom is provided to the student as they get older, and students with PWS are generally successful in the elementary grades when having access to the regular education curriculum. When students engage in the least restrictive environment, food exposure in the classroom relates to anxiety, and the more food exposure there is, the more behavioral episodes will increase, and students will need a more restrictive placement. More importantly, it's important to keep in mind that students with PWS often fail in any educational setting because of the school staff's ability to understand the complexity of this syndrome and how to support the student in all areas of the school building. When discussing behavior as it relates to cognitive ability, there is little evidence that verbal, physical, or other negative behaviors decrease or are not present because the child is more able. Problematic behaviors may occur with any student with PWS, despite their level of cognitive ability. So, the higher the IQ does not necessarily mean that the student will be able to regulate behaviors in the classroom. Students with a higher IQ are not shown to have the ability to self-regulate behaviors when angry or upset. Again, like dietary instruction, they may have the ability to discuss behaviors that are appropriate, but not the ability to generalize appropriate behaviors in a specific situation when angry or upset or when an unexpected change has occurred. Now we're going to talk about strengths for students with PWS. Long-term memory, receptive language skills, reading abilities are often strengths. Many students have exceptional memory about places that they have visited years ago, people that they have come in contact with, and events that they've experienced, as well as meals that they have had. They will be able to remember the specific date that they may have had an extra sweet treat or a time when they participated in a science experiment in the classroom that involved a specific food. Strength in receptive language having the ability to understand language input. So this strength goes beyond just vocabulary skills, but also includes the strength of understanding that a question is a question, or specific concepts like, put the book on the chair. Reading is also a strength, and students with PWS often read with excellent tone and pace, and may even change voices to simulate different characters speaking in a passage. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome understand concrete concepts well. Concrete terms like spoon, table, shirt, book, TV are items they would grasp the meaning of. This is because these terms refer to objects or events we can actually see or hear, feel, taste, or smell. The meanings of these objects are pretty stable. If you ask me what I mean by the word spoon, I can pick up a spoon and show it to you. I can't pick up a freedom and show it to you or point to a small democracy in the classroom. Most students with PWS are very good at putting puzzles together. This can often be an activity that helps to calm the student or provides a diversion. It can also be something that is used as a reward to work for. First, they complete what is expected of them academically, and then they have the time to put a puzzle together. Even at a very young age, they are successful at completing multi-piece puzzles with 25 pieces or more. This is the same with word search type puzzles. Solving these types of puzzles is a strength, along with something that can be used as a reward in the classroom. Morning is often the best time to engage students with PWS in academic activities. However, fatigue level should always be monitored, and it should be determined individually with each student when they are most successful with completing academic tasks. Now I'm going to highlight some weaknesses that you may observe in students with Prader-Willi syndrome. Auditory memory is the ability to take in information that is presented orally. Students with PWS will have difficulty with understanding verbal directions or multi-step directions. It is often difficult when a teacher says to a student, "It is time to go to art, get your art folder, painting apron, and walk down to the art room." When given this direction, it will take time for the student to comply if they do at all. If art is on a written schedule that the student is able to hold and see visually, pictures may be needed as prompts for the student to remember the art folder and painting apron, and verbal or visual cues may be required for them as they leave the classroom, walk to the art room, in order for the student to remember what is expected of them at that specific time. Perseveration is also a significant weakness in students with Prader-Willi syndrome. They often perseverate on meal or snack times, ask questions about a specific topic of interest, or revert back to a topic during a conversation at an inappropriate time. Students often need to be directed to return to the task that is expected of them at that time. Abstract thinking and time concepts are also extremely difficult. Concepts such as "you will have physical education in 30 minutes" or "lunch is in 1 hour" are very difficult for kids with PWS to understand. In contrast, the abstract thinker can conceptualize or generalize, understanding that each concept can have multiple meanings. Students with PWS have difficulty with that conceptual thinking, the generalization, and understanding concepts with multiple meanings. Like many students with disabilities, students with PWS often appear as if they have learned a topic one day to the next day feeling as if they've never been exposed to the same topic. Therefore, repetition of academic skills is extremely important. On the contrast, what is learned is also difficult to unlearn. For example, if a student learns to add one way and then another strategy for addition is introduced, applying that new strategy will be extremely difficult because the student has such rigid thinking, almost as if they're thinking, "This is the way I add, and there is no other way to do it." Students with PWS have poor emotional control and social skills. If music class is something that is on their schedule and they were looking forward to participating, only to find that the music teacher became ill at school, went home sick, and there is not a substitute, tantrums, yelling, aggression, or self-injury may occur rather than just coping with the situation and looking on the bright side that they have music scheduled for this Friday. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome also have poor social skills and social boundaries and often need direct instruction and verbal prompts when engaging and generalizing appropriate social behaviors with peers and adults. So now we're going to begin to discuss each section of the Individualized Education Plan, or the IEP, and how it may look different for a student with Prader-Willi syndrome. 90% of the time, a student with Prader-Willi syndrome is going to display communication needs, and they will be in need of speech and language as a related service. Addressing the receptive and expressive speech and language skill deficits for a student with PWS is essential. Another important aspect of the special considerations to pay attention to is the question, does the student have behaviors that impede his or her learning or that of others? Again, 90% of the time, this is going to be marked yes as well. It is always important to remember the purpose of a functional behavioral assessment. These often need to be conducted for students with Prader-Willi syndrome, and a positive behavior support plan should then be implemented. Many behaviors that students with PWS display center around food exposure. So for example, at the Children's Institute, we have a total food secure environment. We teach families to create total food secure environments in their households. Many of the behaviors that parents report or we review before a student comes to the Children's Institute are non-existent or decrease enormously because the student is admitted into a food secure environment. Also, it's important to keep in mind that you may often be engaging in a functional behavioral assessment to determine if behaviors are a manifestation of the student's diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. An FBA can be an important tool in determining behavior needs for a student with PWS and serves as a way to problem solve to support the student better in the school environment. Beginning in the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, it is important to begin this section with a summary of Prader-Willi syndrome. So any person reading the IEP would receive an overview and important information about the syndrome. A recommended statement to include in the IEP would be, Prader-Willi syndrome, PWS, is the most common known genetic cause of life-threatening obesity in children. Although the cause is complex, it results from an abnormality on the 15th chromosome. PWS typically causes low muscle tone. If not treated with growth hormone, persons with PWS may have a short stature or incomplete sexual development. A chronic feeling of hunger is always present, coupled with a metabolism that utilizes drastically fewer calories than normal. PWS can lead to excessive eating and life-threatening obesity. Additionally, individuals with PWS are at risk of death from a single incident of uncontrolled eating, which can lead to fatal rupturing of the digestive system. It is important for students with PWS to engage in a food-secure environment in the school setting. For more information about PWS, please visit www.amazingkids.org or www.pwsausa.org. I firmly believe that the federal IDEA law, as well as the state special education laws and what is required for transition services, do not mix for students with PWS. Providing transition services for students with Prader-Willi syndrome can be extremely difficult. When discussing options for post-secondary education or engaging in vocational assessments related to the student's interest area, food service locations, food-related activities are often popular options in the eyes of the student with Prader-Willi syndrome. Post-secondary education, such as culinary programs, custodial programs cleaning food areas, such as cafeterias, restaurants, other programs, and locations related to food, are not appropriate for the student to be exposed to. Additionally, when engaging in activities related to independent living, such as food shopping, food preparation, community-based instruction trips, cooking activities, instructional activities focusing on buying food from a grocery store, or even reading a recipe independently, are also not activities in which the student should engage in. It's important to keep in mind, too, that the PWS community is unaware of a person that has been successful living independently, and these students are often residents of group homes that have food security and trained staff to support persons with this syndrome. When a student is assessed using a vocational assessment of your choice, and a food service location or employment setting is the #1 interest, document in the IEP that this assessment was given, but due to the student's diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome, it is not an option. Documenting why it is not appropriate to engage in independent living skills related to food or food-based post-secondary education programs is also a best practice. When making a statement for the IEP to determine how the student's disability affects progress in the general education curriculum, it's really important to keep the idea of food security in mind. So a statement such as, due to the diagnosis of PWS, the students needs accommodations and modifications to the general education curriculum. These accommodations and modifications should include a food secure environment, non-participation in food-related units, lessons, or instructional topics during the school day. Food should also not be used as a reinforcement in the general education curriculum. Examples of how food may be used in the curriculum would be in a nutrition unit in health class, a science unit using food for experimental reasons, or using food as manipulatives during math lessons. Alternative items other than food should be used to teach these same concepts in that general education curriculum, if possible. And if the student with PWS, if not, then the student with PWS could be provided with an alternative unit or activity to engage in during this time outside of the classroom in order to minimize the amount of food exposure. When writing goals for students with Prader-Willi syndrome, you don't want to focus around food. As with all students with disabilities, you want to make sure that you have 4 pieces of information in order for the goal to be measurable. You must include the name of the student, the criteria, the evaluation method, and the schedule of the evaluation. When focusing on criteria, think about what the student needs to perform, how often, and over what period of time to show mastery of the skill. The evaluation discusses how progress will be measured. The schedule of the evaluation needs to answer the questions when, how often, on what dates, or at what interval. So for example, an appropriate goal would not be the student will increase reading ability. This goal does not name the student. It does not name the criteria, how the progress will be measured, or how often or at what interval. So let's look at the goal of Jack will independently read 9 out of 10 food words from the menu on 9 consecutive weekly probes with a baseline of 0 out of 10. This is written as a measurable goal, but it is not appropriate for a student with PWS because it is food-based. IEP goals are based on skill deficit. So as we talked about before, students with PWS often have a skill deficit in the area of math. An appropriate goal may be, given a worksheet with 10 3-digit addition problems with regrouping, Jack will independently and correctly solve 9 out of 10 problems on 9 consecutive weekly probes. It's also important to include a baseline for where the student is currently functioning with this goal. So you may include that Jack's baseline is currently 2 out of 10 with this specific skill. A best practice when writing short-term objectives is to break the measurable goal down into smaller components of criteria, not a different skill. So the short-term objective for the above goal may look something like, given a worksheet with 10 3-digit addition problems with regrouping, Jack will independently and correctly solve 5 out of 10 problems on 9 consecutive weekly probes. And then another short-term objective would state the exact same thing, but with 7 out of 10 problems as the criteria. The ultimate goal is within the year of the IEP that you would be getting to 9 out of 10 problems on 9 consecutive weekly probes. Program modifications and specially designed instruction in the IEP is extremely important for students with PWS, as it is for all students with disabilities. Statements to include in this section are food security in the classrooms in locations where instruction and services are received during the day. What is meant by this statement is that teachers and staff should also be mindful of garbage cans, containers that may have food items in them. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome may seek food from garbage cans or containers if not properly supervised. Teachers and staff should also be mindful of food and drink items that they have exposed on their desk during the school day, and various offices in the school should be mindful of food exposure. So for example, the guidance department or the main office, if there is small treats or something on the counter, those things should also be secure. Food-related activities should not occur during the school day. What is meant by this statement is that teachers and staff should not use food as reinforcement, such as M&Ms for good behavior. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome should not participate in food-related classes, such as home economics, cooking, or food-related coursework, like buying items from a grocery store ad or reading menu words. Students with PWS should not be exposed to community-based instruction trips related to food or within a food setting, like going to a restaurant to order food independently or buying groceries. Alternative activities of equal interest should be provided during times when food is related to instruction or special events. Alternative activities should be provided when a birthday party, a holiday party, or a special event is occurring that involves food. Ideally, it would be best if these types of activities and special events did not involve food. You almost have to compare Prader-Willi syndrome to the supports you provide for students that have a peanut allergy in the school system. Peanut treats and snacks would not be provided for a student with this allergy, so food should not be included in these activities to support a student with PWS and allow them to participate. Additionally, the alternative activity should not be viewed as a punishment. The student should not be given a 50-question math worksheet or another academic task to complete in the hallway while their friends are completing or celebrating a birthday party of a classmate. The student shouldn't be punished because they have Prader-Willi syndrome. They should be provided with an activity that is of high interest to them at this time. Knowing the student as an individual and what they're interested in will really assist with how to support the student during these times in the school day. Once food is cleaned up and secured away, it's also important for the student to be reintroduced to that activity with his or her peers in order to provide a time for socialization with peers and adults that does not include food or food-related activities. Alternative setting for all scheduled meal times is also recommended. This means that the student should not eat breakfast, lunch, or snack if provided with regular education peers in the cafeteria or in the classroom. This recommendation is made basically due to the fact that meal times are an activity that involves high anxiety and not a time for socialization for a student with Prader-Willi syndrome. Exposure to food during meal times with peers could lead to behavior problems later in the day or in the actual setting where meals are being administered. Additional program modifications and specially designed instruction should also reflect providing a structured routine. This routine should provide a clear visual schedule which reflects daily activities in order for students with Prader-Willi syndrome to predict what is going to happen next in their day. Setting clear expectations for participation in academic and school-related activities is also important. Don't make a promise that can't be kept. This could possibly lead to behavior problems or aggressive episodes. So don't provide more information than is necessary, especially far in advance. This will assist with decreasing perseveration and behavior problems. Provide high levels of verbal praise and positive attention. Talk about what you want the student to do. Don't tell them what you want them to stop doing. A student with Prader-Willi syndrome should also be provided with at least 30 minutes of physical exercise during the day. Walking is the best form of exercise for the student. It's recommended to provide a structured time throughout the day for the student to walk the hallways, a track at the school, or in the gym. It's also a best practice to include this walking activity in the student's schedule by scheduling what I like to call walking for a purpose. So for example, you may give the student a school job of delivering mail to teachers in the building where they're expected to walk to each teacher's classroom to deliver mail with adult supervision. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome should also be evaluated to determine if adapted physical education is appropriate in the school setting. Weekly weight checks with the nurse are also extremely important. Students with PWS are on strict caloric diets. A student that is following a 600 or 800 calorie per day diet should not be gaining weight with proper exercise, strict adherence to the diet, and food security. If they are gaining weight, there may be a place in their environment, at home or at school, where they may be gaining access to food that others do not know about. So this weight check-in with the school nurse serves as a way to really monitor if the weight is increasing and provides a reason to problem solve with the team and communicate with parents as to where there may be a lack in food security. So communicating these weekly weights between the school and the family in a communication book is important to do. Now let's talk about specialized transportation. This is recommended for students with Prader-Willi syndrome. When the student gets on the bus in the morning, the parent should hand the packed lunch to the bus driver. Once arriving at school, the bus driver should hand the lunch to an adult. The lunch should then be placed in a locked cabinet and provided to the student at the scheduled lunchtime. This would also be the same if the parent is bringing the student to school in the morning. So the reason that this procedure should occur is because the student would consume the lunch before arriving to school, and many students often engage in confabulation or distorted or misinterpreted memories about what happened without the conscious intention to deceive, and the student may state that they never had a packed meal in order to gain an additional amount of food at lunch or during snack. If this is the case, teachers and staff should also communicate with the parent to determine if food was sent on the bus in the morning before providing the student with additional food in the school setting. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome are most successful in the least restrictive environment when they are provided with the support of a one-to-one instructional and behavioral aid. This support provides consistency for the student and also keeps them safe in the school setting. Students with Prader-Willi syndrome will always need support from caregivers and adults when it comes to food. So providing the students with a one-to-one aid decreases the amount of food seeking, the ability to obtain food, and it also supports the goal of maximum functioning and not independence for students with PWS. Documenting that the IEP teams, regular education teachers, and other staff has received training is essential to include under the section Supports for School Personnel. Supporting a student with PWS in the school environment can be a challenging task. So the more education and resources that are available to school teams, the more successful a student with Prader-Willi syndrome will be in the least restrictive environment. It's recommended that this training occur at least once during the duration of the student's IEP. However, it may need to occur more, and staff from the Children's Institute is able to provide that training, or the national office may also need to be consulted throughout the school year for support during the IEP meetings, new staff trainings, or problem-solving sessions based on the student's needs and behaviors. Now let's talk about what we've learned. Amanda is a student with Prader-Willi syndrome in your classroom. The Halloween party is scheduled to occur on Friday at 1 o'clock. Activities include students passing out candy to their friends, Halloween cupcakes, and a bingo game using candy as bingo markers. Let's think about how you would accommodate Amanda in this classroom. The best case scenario would be to prepare Amanda for the Halloween party that starts at 1 in advance, because this is an activity that is occurring outside of her regular schedule. Revise the activities to not include passing out candy to their friends or Halloween cupcakes. Maybe the students could pass out erasers or pencils instead. Instead of Halloween cupcakes, think of how a nutritious snack could be provided and where Amanda could be provided with an alternative setting to eat the snack, returning after eating to engage in the Halloween activities with her peers. Think of other items that could be used as bingo markers, blocks or typical bingo markers. Engage Amanda in this activity as much as possible without food as the focus, so that you are providing her with access to the least restrictive environment. Now let's look at this scenario. Jack is a student with Prader-Willi syndrome in your classroom. You have a behavior system designed that uses a traffic light. If the students stay on green all day, they get 3 M&Ms. If they're on yellow at the end of the day, they get 1 M&M. If they are on red, they do not get any M&Ms. The M&Ms are stored in a large container on your desk. Let's think about how you would accommodate Jack in your classroom with this behavior system in place. First, even if Jack is not following the behavior system and has an individual behavior plan, you want to make sure the M&Ms are locked in a cabinet that he can't access during the school day. Plan that when other students are receiving their rewards of M&Ms and that Jack is participating in another activity of high interest when these rewards are being handed out. Also, the ultimate thing would be to think about other reinforcements that could be used for all students instead of the M&Ms. Stickers, pencils, extra computer time, iPad time, or other items that would be motivated to kids to display good behavior. So let's look at this scenario. Lisa is a student with Prader-Willi syndrome that also participates in the least restrictive environment for about 50% of the school day. Her class is scheduled to go on a field trip to the Pittsburgh Zoo. After the students go to the zoo in the morning, they will be stopping at McDonald's for lunch on the way home. How do you accommodate Lisa in order for her to participate in this field trip with her classmates? Well, let's think about this. There are many ways to accommodate Lisa to support her with attending this trip. 1, transportation could be set up individually with the school to transport Lisa back to school after going to the zoo. Lisa could return to school when her classmates are stopping at McDonald's and eat lunch where she eats lunch each day at school. Providing Lisa with a social story or advance notice of this trip would also be appropriate. It's essential as well that Lisa would be provided with one-to-one adult supervision during the entire trip at the zoo, since she may be exposed to the areas of the zoo that are not food secure. And one last scenario. Due to Hannah's diagnosis of PWS, she is currently on a strict caloric diet of 800 calories per day. She is being weighed by the school nurse 1 time per week, and the weight is recorded in a communication book that is sent home to her parents each day. The past 3 weeks, her weight has increased, and she has gained almost 14 pounds. What would you do to assist Hannah and her family? First and foremost, you would need to communicate this weight immediately with Hannah's family. Schedule an IEP meeting with the team and the parent to discuss where or if there was a break in food security and additional supports that could be put into place in order for Hannah to get back on track with losing weight each week. The ideas talked about throughout these case studies are not the only way to support these students. They just provide you with a way to get your brain thinking outside of the box when supporting a student with Prader-Willi syndrome. Be creative and always have an open line of communication between all members of the team, and most importantly, with the parents of the student. All students with Prader-Willi syndrome are individuals, and a strategy and support that may work for one student may not work for another student. Contact information for the Prader-Willi Syndrome USA office in Sarasota, Florida is provided here, as well as my contact information at the Children's Institute of Pittsburgh. Additionally, keep in mind that many states across the country also have active state PWS chapters that could also provide some additional information to you. Oops. This next slide shows some resources that are available on the PWSA USA website, and that are also included in a school folder free of charge for professionals that are interested in obtaining more information about this syndrome and how to support students in the school environment. Please pay attention to this information as well for completing the module of the WSEAT series. This concludes the webinar. Thank you very much.